We cannot just construct a moral theory against racism and ask people to be kind to each other. A man or a woman's ethnicity is that unique gift from God himself, and no one human being is essentially superior to the other. There's no way to argue for that unless you believe in a transcendent moral order. So we see it. First, the popularization of the death of God. Second, the disorienting hit of religious pluralism. And the attack of Eastern philosophy upon the West as not having a moral and spiritual center. Thirdly, it is the power to inform through the visual and the blurring of reality. We no longer know how to understand, articulate reasons for what we believe, because so much of the insights that we now get are coming to us through the visual. William Blake, the Romantic poet, had alerted this to us a long time ago, and I wonder what he would say in our time. But William Blake, talking about the eyes, said this life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole, and goads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye. This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole, and goads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye. The Blakean concept of visualizing reality was that we are to see through the eye with the conscience, but we end up seeing with the eye devoid of a conscience. And the power of the lens of the camera today is an enormous power. Like any great attainment in human endeavor, it comes with a mixed blessing. How wonderful to know that the camera can be used for glorious glimpses of things happening far away, enjoying wonderful sporting events from thousands of miles away, seeing the beauty of so much even while far away. The camera gives us that possibility, but the camera also has some very subtle dangers. Malcolm Muggeridge, that peripatetic journalist, I had the privilege of spending a few hours with him just 7 months before he died. His last attempt at dealing with reality was his plea for the human being to understand the power of the lens of the camera. And he said this in one of his books, Christ and the Media: the most horrifying example I know of the camera's power and authority, which will surely be in the history books as an example of the degradation our servitude to it can involve, occurred in Nigeria at the time of the Biafran War. A prisoner was to be executed by a firing squad, and the cameras turned up in force to photograph and film the scene. Just as the command to fire was about to be given, one of the cameramen shouted, "Cut! My battery is dead and needs to be replaced." Until this was done, the execution stood suspended. Then, with his battery working again, he shouted, "Action!" And bang, bang, the prisoner fell to the ground, his death duly recorded to be shown in millions of sitting rooms throughout the so-called civilized world. Some future historian may speculate as to where lay the greatest barbarism, on the part of the viewers, the executioners, or the cameras. I think myself someday that some wise person would plump for the cameras. And I think of the extensions that are made today, with all, for example, that is happening in the power and the capacity of the internet. Again, it's wonderful, all that it gives access to us for. But we had better be careful that the same power to inform and educate brings with it the capacity to destroy and mutilate. And you have to wonder, if we do not have the moral courage with which to deal with these, how many millions of young lives will be sacrificed at these altars, and we will not even be aware of what is happening to so many young lives in the process. So I see, number one, the popularization of the death of God and its entailments being accepted, the disorienting hit of religious pluralism, the power to inform through the visual. Fourthly, the lost center for cultural molding. There is no place left with which to mold the center anymore, and we are struggling to find out how we can best describe reality, who has the right to explain reality to us. Saul Bellow reminded us of this very carefully in one of his warnings. But he invited the writers to step in. Here's what he said. The intelligent public is waiting to hear from art what it does not hear from theology, philosophy, and social theory, what it cannot hear from pure science, a full and broader, more coherent, more comprehensive account of what we human beings are, who we are, and what this life is for. If writers do not come into the center, it will not be because the center is preempted. It is not. You know, the most fascinating aspect of what he has said here, the very thing that he is pining for is the very reason universities were brought into being. When you think of the greatest pursuit of humanity, the greatest pursuit philosophically has been to find unity in diversity. That's where we get the word quintessence. It literally means fifth essence, because the early Greek philosophers, at least one of them, propounded four essences: earth, air, water, fire. And somebody came and said, wait a minute, that's four. What is the quintessence, the fifth essence that unites these four essences? America on every coin has these words, e pluribus unum. Out of the many, one. Out of diversity, unity. The very word university means to find unity in diversity. And yet you talk to an average university student today and he or she will tell you unity and diversity is the farthest aspect of their studies. As specializations increase, finding a connecting thread within the disciplines becomes more and more elusive. Sal Bello is calling for the writers to step in the middle and give us something that will hold our culture, something that will pull our culture back together. And he says the center is preempted, and he's pleading with the writers to come and take charge. And it is fascinating that he ultimately says only art can give us that kind of vision, and the writers more particularly. But fifthly, it is the shifting power to a younger world. I don't know if I have the statistics exactly correct here, and if I'm wrong later on, if one of you would correct me, I'd be happy to be corrected. But the last statistic that I received was that over 60% of the world is under 24. And if you look at huge cities like Mexico City, where the median age is at about 14 or 15 and falling, and look at the mega cities like Calcutta or Delhi or Bombay or whatever, and see large numbers of young people, I think one of the things you notice more and more as you travel is the large number of young people desperately looking for some answer, some direction. I think the whole struggle recently in one of the major networks between a veteran newsman being displaced and being displaced by somebody younger was only symptomatic of the fact that even seasoned veterans respected in their discipline are no longer meaningful to the news media, because the audience they are seeking is getting younger and younger all the time. And anybody who is young who celebrates that, just remember, while the younger one may be sought, that younger one is being also sought for a shorter span of time. And therefore, when some cultures where the senior or the veteran for years has had, he or she has had the ability to instruct with wisdom and experience and warn us of all that could go wrong in a young life, now all of a sudden, without the experience, but with all the opportunities before us, culture is being redefined for us before our eyes. If I take these 5 realities, the popularization of the death of God and the stridency in its entailments, the disorienting hit of religious pluralism and the attack upon Western culture in the process, the power to inform through the visual and the blurring of distinctions between fact and fancy, the lost center for cultural molding, and the shifting power to a younger world. What it really boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, very simply and plainly is this. These are my words. How do you reach a generation that listens with its eyes and thinks with its feelings? How do you reach a generation that listens with its eyes and thinks with its feelings? That is the enormous challenge any claimer of truth is now confronted with, not the least of which, of course, is the very church of the Lord Jesus Christ. How do we communicate? And I believe there are ways, there are effective ways. And as dark as this scene may sound, and as much as there is a sudden fear that none of this is going to be possible in effective communication anymore, I really believe I have hope. And that is not just merely stated for the sake of effect. I believe there are reasons for it. But let me give you 3 responses that hint in the direction of where I think, speaking now as a Christian, the church must be and the communicator of the gospel must be. Number 1, I believe it will need a Christian and an apologetic response that is not merely heard but is also seen. It is a Christian and an apologetic response that is not merely heard but is also seen. This generation, to their credit, the younger generation, I think when you see the demographics of the differences between the previous generation and this, my generation, for example, was willing to listen to a speaker, to listen to him or to her, and accept a lot of what he or she said on the basis of the authenticity of the message being communicated. The younger generation will tell you that's not good enough. They're willing to listen to a man or a woman who is speaking on the basis of the authenticity of the messenger. Is this person for real? In a survey that was conducted by various census bureaus in Canada, amongst their youth, the question was asked was, what is it you long for most in life? You know, you would think of many possible answers. What is it you long for most in life? And the Canadian teenager's number 1 answer in given various options was this: somebody you can believe. That's at the heart of skepticism today. Most men and women are not sure of the believability of the person who is communicating something to them. Let me tell you how outlandish things can be. Forgive me, I hope this is not too blunt an illustration for us. I arrived in an Islamic country in March, and they've been very courteous to me over the years in giving me the opportunity to come in there and defend the Christian faith. I do that. I present a defense of the Christian faith and answer their questions. I've done this for many years, and the invitations are just pouring in from the toughest Islamic universities in the globe. But I landed in this city in the month of March, and the plane arrived at 1 a.m., so the city was pitch black. The airport's about an hour away from the city. And as we were driving into the city, pitch black darkness, I could look at the visor, and by the name of the man, I knew he was a Muslim. And I waited and waited till I could see about the lights of the city, and then I called him by name. After looking at his name on the visor, I said, what do you think of what happened in America on September the 11th? And he lowered his rearview mirror to just size me up. I put on a very strong Indian accent in my question. I'm serious. And then found out he spoke Hindi, so we could converse in Hindi. And he said to me, do you know what really happened? I said, yeah. He said, no. Do you know what really happened that day? I guessed he was baiting me. I said, what do you think happened? He said, for a long time, America has wanted to build an oil pipeline in Afghanistan. And the only people standing in America's way were the Taliban. Now was the moment when they had an oil man in the White House who could find a reason to start attacking the Taliban and build their pipeline. And that whole attack on September 11th, he said, was staged by the president and the White House itself so that they could now move and start building an oil pipeline in Afghanistan. And you put your head back and you say, where do I go from here? If I say the wrong thing, will I even go from here? I paused, waited till the lights were a little closer. It's true. I'm telling you exactly the way it happened. It's true. The Lord's my witness. I share it with you. I said, you know, I've lived on this side of the world for a lot of my life. And if I can say something to you as honestly as I can, I think you are revealing the way we think out here much more than you're revealing the way that possibly the people back there would think. Are you really telling me the president of that nation organized the planes to bomb the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, even his own home, possibly, to go and build a pipeline somewhere? And you know, I can put 2 or 3 conversations together, and here's what one of them said when I asked the question. In Hindi, he said to me, you can do anything you want with technology. I said, so when bin Laden admitted that he'd done this, or looks at it and he says, he was shocked to see how quickly the building collapsed. He hadn't anticipated so much damage to happen. Or when you see the pictures of those going on the plane in order to do this, who represented a completely different world, he just threw his hands up and he said, this is technology. This is our technology. The American technology can make it look like anything. That's really not what happened. I chatted with him a little, tried to talk to him. Next day when I came out of my hotel, he was standing outside the hotel. I walked straight up to him and he said, I have come to apologize to you. I think I offended you. I said, it is not the offense that you need to be worried about. It's the truth. What really happened? I said, because you believe a lie, the logical outworking of what you believe can cost the lives of millions of people in the future. They don't know whom to believe. And the more you talked, they came out with their conclusion. One of them said to me, I don't even believe my own leaders. I don't believe anyone out here. When I finished a series of lectures at the University of Iowa to a packed audience that had gone so well, the next day my colleague and I were being driven to the airport. And the inviting person looked at me and he said, Ravi, I brought a medical doctor friend of ours last night. She was in attendance. Do you know what she had to say at the end of the talk last night? I really wanted to say no. I don't want to know. But I said, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm on my way out anyway. He says to me, she was quiet, very quiet. After the 3 hours of a talk and a Q&A, my wife finally looked at her and said, what do you think? She had just one statement to make. She said, very, very compelling. I wonder what he's like in his private life. I can tell you, it was hard to keep the tears out of my eyes at that moment. I respected her for that comment. And to you and me, as those who claim to follow Jesus Christ, that is the question in the hearts of many men and women. You see why? It is not that we claim merely a more ethical way of thinking. That's not it. We are claiming that the transformation is supernaturally engendered. Born again of the Holy Spirit. If it is a supernaturally engendered new birth, there must be the evidence for that supernatural transformation. That's the point, I think. That's the point. So an apologetic and a Christian faith that is going to have to be not merely heard, but also seen. Also seen. Let your light so shine before men, says Jesus, that they'll see your good works and glorify our Father who is in heaven. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said, I like their Christ, but I'm not sure I like their Christian. Gypsy Smith said there are 5 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian, and most people will never read the first 4. There is the need for that embodiment in some way. Secondly, it is an apology. I'll go a little longer in this, if I may, and we can adjust the Q&A time accordingly. An apologetic that is not merely argued but also felt. So an apologetic is not merely heard but also seen, not merely argued but also felt. By that I mean there is that expectation of the visceral, existential, impassioned reality of our message. Can you see anything more impassioned than the cross? where all of human emotion can rise to the surface at what is being seen. And somehow, I think existentialism came into being because of the unpaid bills of rationalism. Rationalism made us such cerebrally dominant individuals in the pursuit of truth that the heart and the emotion was lost in the process. And if our apologetic or our message is merely cerebral, but not felt, and does not have that existential tug, then it becomes once again an argument that is merely theory. There is no passion behind it. It was David Hume, the skeptic, who was going to hear George Whitefield speak, and somebody said to David Hume, "You don't believe what Whitefield does, do you?" He said, "Absolutely not, but I want to hear a man who does. I want to hear somebody who does." And that skeptic would listen to a man who so impassionedly believed that. Now, is this minimizing argument? No, not at all. I remember being at Ohio State University in an open forum, and Hugh Ross, the astrophysicist, and I were on a live radio program on the university campus. And within a minute or two, any one of you who's heard that tape will remember that within a minute or two, we got a series of hostile calls, and one of them said to get these blankety-blank metaphysicians off the air. Metaphysics has no place in the realm of truth. One of those empirical boys who was pontificating metaphysically to tell us that metaphysics has no place in any one of these. But he was ranting and raging over it. Halfway through, a woman called, and she said, "I know what you men are about anyway." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I know what your agenda is here. You're giving us all these philosophical arguments. Your real agenda is to somehow fight against abortion, and that's what this is all about." I said, "Wait a minute, man. We've not even mentioned that." She said, "I know, but that's what all this philosophical talk is about. That's where you all ultimately..." I said, "You never mentioned that." She said, "I know, but that's what this is all about anyway." So I said to her, okay, since you brought it up, let's talk about it. Why do you believe in it? She said, "It's my moral right." I said, "That's interesting. So interesting." I said, "You know, I go to many university campuses, and a question from the floor will come something like this. A plane is in midair, something goes wrong, it explodes, and the bodies come crashing to the earth. 90 people die, and 2 people live, and we call it an act of God. And then somebody will raise the question and say, what kind of God is this, who allows just 90 to come crashing to their death and 2 to live? This must be an immoral or an amoral God." I said, "Isn't it interesting? When something is attributed to God's choice as to who should live and who should die, society will call that immoral. When you determine who should live and who should die in your womb, you call it your moral right. Can you explain this conundrum to me?" The moderator, who was an atheist, pressed the next button and said, "Let's move on." I understand the pain of that question. I don't think they are to be responded to without any emotion or heartfelt realization that for many it may be a genuine struggle. To those who see the life as a gift from God and the baby in the mother's womb as a gift from God, and take the word of God as it is given to us, that we are all fearfully and wonderfully made and framed even before the foundation of the world, as it were, by our Father's hands, and that life is essentially seen in His eyes, we see that individual as a human life. But to somebody else who does not even see it that way, the argument is there, and we must argue. We must legitimately deal with it. But I'll tell you, in the long run, when the day is over, these arguments will die natural deaths if we are not at the same time able to bring the passion and the feeling with what it is that this gospel message is all about. I'll tell you, it's not the cerebral impetus alone that drives me to many of these places. It is what I feel from the depths of my heart. Thirdly, and quickly, we can expand on these a little more later on. It is an approach that rescues not only the ends of reaching men and women with the truth, but the means itself. What our society desperately needs is not just the fact that we are out to convey the truth as a Christian. But please hear me very carefully. I do not know how this will ever be accomplished unless we recover the value and the beauty and the power of language once again. One of the saddest deaths in Western culture in the last few decades has been the death of language. We no longer place any value on words. We minimize language. We try to think words have their own meanings dependent upon the one who uses them. He or she fuses it with their own meaning as he or she chooses to do so. And I tell you, what Jacques Ellul talked about, the humiliation of the word, the death of language has been a tragic death in our times. And there's one thing that has to be said for Eastern culture, where the preservation of language has been so beautiful and so strong. The English language is robust, it's vibrant. The literature that is available in the English language is a tremendous bequest to people who understand that language. I myself am so grateful to God for giving me the privilege of studying and learning that language. But even now, after living with this language for so long, there are some things I can say in Hindi which I cannot even say in English. It'll lose something in the translation. Language is a genuine gift from God. He did not say to us, in the beginning was video. He said to us, in the beginning was the Word. Of all the metaphors that he could use, he took the metaphor of word because truth is primarily a property of propositions, which when stated conforms to reality. The word is so needful in our time. How do you reach a generation that is listening with its eyes and thinking with its feelings, where life and feeling are synonymous? May I suggest to you, you reach that generation with a life where the life and the word are synonymous. The life and the word are synonymous. You see, ultimately, living with incoherence brings them to a logical breakdown, and the world now knows it. Listen to Daniel Yankelevich, who defined culture as a coherent set of answers. Here's what he says at the end of his article. He studies numerous couples and individuals to deduce where they were headed in the 1980s. He was prophetic. Here's the way he ended his article. If you feel it is imperative to fill all your needs, and if these needs are contradictory or in conflict with those of others or simply unfillable, then frustration inevitably follows. In studying the lives of Abby and Mark, we notice this, he says. To be Abby and to Mark as well, self-fulfillment means having a career and marriage and children and sexual freedom and autonomy and being liberal and having money and choosing nonconformity and insisting on social justice and enjoying city life and country living and simplicity and graciousness and reading and good friends and on and on. He said, but the individual is not truly fulfilled by becoming ever more autonomous. Indeed, to move too far in this direction is to risk psychosis, the ultimate form of autonomy. And then he says this, the injunction that to find oneself, one must lose oneself, contains a truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. Well, Mr. Yankelevich, thank you so much for that deduction. That's what the gospel reminds us too, in more poignant and more specific terms. That to find oneself, one must lose oneself. And what I say to you is that the cross of Jesus Christ today stands in brilliant counter-perspective to a world with all of these converging contradictions. And when the contradictions are put into verbal form, you see how the life has completely broken down. And we'll get on to that and show why it is that the cross provides that counter-perspective. and what it is that the answers really bring in the Christian faith. But let me tie it together with this simple little illustration, going back to the idea of the word and life being synonymous. You know, the grandeur of the word first. I've seen many paintings of the conversion of water into wine. They are beautiful paintings, but not one of them made its impact on me as the words of Alexander Pope did. The conscious water saw its master and blushed. It's beautiful. May we recover the beauty of language. The world wants to hear the word again, presented in beauty, not only in truth, and in a life that embodies it. So Thomas More, in A Man for All Seasons, is put behind bars because he's not going to affirm the king in his immoral choice. When he is behind bars, his daughter comes to him and says, "Daddy, it's only words, isn't it? Why don't you affirm him? Just say the line, it's only words, isn't it? And Daddy, you can walk out of here a free man." He says, "Meg, you don't understand. When you give somebody your word, it's like taking yourself and putting yourself in your hands and presenting that to them. If you shall let that word fall through and not honor it, Meg, when you look down again, you shall not find yourself there." Maybe when the world looks at the cupped hands of the church today, it doesn't see us there anymore. If we can give them the word and live a life that is identical with that word, I'll tell you what they will find would be what brings life to the ultimate truth, so that the feeling is transcended, the emotion is transcended, morality is understood, truth is pursued, the eye and the mind are working in sequence again. There is a moral and spiritual center by which to understand life, and a gospel that transcends every generation, young and old. My prayer for the Church of Jesus Christ in these days is that we will give the world the word, and that we will keep our word in the process, so that when we look down, we will see ourselves there in honor and integrity. Then the person for whom feeling and life is synonymous will understand what it means to see the life and word synonymous too. May God bless you. Thank you very much for your patience.
The preceding was a presentation of the C.S. Lewis Institute. In the legacy of C.S. Lewis, the Institute endeavors to develop disciples who can articulate, defend, and live faith in Christ through personal and public life. For more information, please visit our website at www.cslewisinstitute.org. Thank you.